Hello guys, it's been a while. This is the second part of the Gunlancer change video. The video will cover the red build. Gunlancer got some cool changes over on this balance patch. The stat distributions are the same with an entropy set though. The crit and swiftness distributions are preference, and there are two major ones. There is a crit main stat build, and there's swift main stat build. The crit main stat build is the more popular one after the balance patch. Since Gunlancer's damage plummets if you see white numbers, and since there are more 10% consistent synergy classes after the balance patch, crit stat between 1500 to 1300 is recommended. If you do so, you will roam around 93 to 100% crit rate if you have crit synergy in your party. Therefore, the allocations are completely preference based on how much you hate white numbers. Swiftness main build was also a popular build, where you allocate the missing crit with adrenaline. However, after the balance patch, adrenaline stack upkeep is much harder with the new skill set Red Gunlancers are taking. The advantage of this build is the uptime of synergy being much higher, with more comfortable faster play. Also, it does a little bit more overall DPS, but it's difficult to rotate that many more skills landing on the head. As for additional engraving notes, 9-7 stone doesn't really work with Red Gunlancer due to combat readiness being so efficient. But Adrenaline 2 could work on the swiftness build if they want. However, no need to look into investing higher stones here. Red Gunlancer got few changes in skill setup and damage. The ready attack buff has been transferred over to flat damage. So you're not forced to always start with bash with the 6-second timer for squeezing in DPS skills on the head. Therefore, the bash is important has been taken down, whereas you have 3 skill choices based on your playstyle preference. Since we can lower the level of the synergy skills, we can allocate more points on the 5 damage skills. You have counter gunlance or fire bullet for your 5th damage skill. If you're using counter gunlance, you need to activate it as often as you can because damage is significant. I'm still working on trying to activate them as much as I can, but it's fairly difficult, but very fun too. Cooldown gems aren't really needed if you're not used to using it on every cooldown, but feel free to add it when you're comfortable and want to rotate this skill more. Also, since raid meter penalties like Clown and Theomine meters are halved for Gunlancer, Destroyer, and Artillerist, it is important for Gunlancers to be aggressive and use counter gunlance to tank hits and damage the boss. As for Fire Bullet, it is used for people who do not want to use counter gunlance at all. It does less damage overall than counter gunlance, but you will need to take it for destruction or stagger heavy raids like a Con Gate 2 or future raids like Voldy's Gate 3. You can use a damage gem for this, but don't be pressured by it because it is often used for temporary utility. I have counter gunlance damage gem, but if I want to use Fire Bullet, I don't swap gems at all because it's a temporary fix. But if you really like Fire Bullet, you can invest on a damage gem on that and keep using it as well. Some people do that. For Nalashia's Energy and Shout of Hatred, they're pretty much the same too. As for T1 tripods for Shout of Hatred, I am using range increase with focus runes at the moment, but you're also fine using mana reduction tripod and pretty much use any runes except wealth because it does not work. So another option you could do is you could take the mana tripod and take either rage or bleed runes for some additional benefits that the old Red Gunlancer couldn't have. Let's talk about the synergy skills in detail. Now you have 3 choices based on preference. You have bash, you have shield bash, and you have shield shock. For tripods, they're all set in stone. People who are curious about shield enhancement, the additional shield gain is too small, and you don't have tripod leveling spots left, so it's actually pretty useless. Talking about bash, it has the highest stagger, and you can use it as a counter. Most people are using this from all the great utility it provides. However, the range is still disappointing out of the 3. Shield Bash activates the fastest with granting additional mobility, but it has the shortest synergy time, making you reuse the skill more often than not. You can also do cool things like triple dash, adding your spacebar in, traveling pretty far considering you're a Gunlancer. Shield Shock is the worst one in my opinion. The AoE range is pretty nice, but the synergy uptime is pretty slow based on cooldown, and your animation lock the longest. Therefore, the choice is yours, make sure to give them a try. In summary, here are all the skill layout and the gems. You have choices between counter gunlance and fire bullet, and then you have choices between the 3 synergy skills. After allocating double gems on the main DPS skills, you have 2 gems extra for any preferences. You can put cooldown gem on shout to rotate it a little more, but some people don't equip it to match its cooldown with surge and stinger. Counter gunlance is also good, but again, you will need to be able to take advantage of it by rotating it that much more. Nalasha is the most efficient for cooldown gem due to its long cooldown. But Nella itself isn't a skill that benefits a lot for rotating more often, especially in reclear parties. If some people really like Shield Shock, having a cooldown gem there may help match the synergy uptime. All of them are great preferences. I have my 2 cooldown gems on Shout and Nalasha for faster rotation for synergy and having Nella ready a little faster for the party. because I had situations where my Nella was 5 seconds off cooldown during an important mechanic from something like Theomine Raid. For gem priorities, make sure you get the highest damage and highest cooldown gems on Surge and Stinger. Then everything else can be leveled at a slower pace. Red Gunlancer playstyle hasn't really changed, but it got a lot smoother and simpler. You will still start with Bash and Shout for synergies, but you do not need to rush yourself to land your Surge and Stinger combo because you don't have the ready attack buff anymore. So it is very important to spend extra time getting into hit position before landing your skills. If you're happen to be using Judgment and Conviction runes on Dash Upper Fire and Spear Shot, make sure to pop those first before using your Surge and Charge Stinger for shorter cooldowns on them. As for Outtro, you will need to use it after landing your Shout Bash combo. You can squeeze all your major skills in less than 8 seconds. And if you're lucky, maybe you can squeeze in a counter Gunlance too. Red Gunlancer's ceiling damage is much higher than blue Gunlancer's, and has a lot more burst potential working with Outtro and support buffs. They also deliver much higher burst stagger if Bash is used. However, they are more difficult to perform if the player is not used to head attacking. Sometimes, if you play it very poorly, it will do less than half the damage of blue Gunlancers. Also, head attack is probably the hardest positional play in Lostark. I would recommend the red over blue for players who are looking for a swiftier gameplay with lots of bursts, and for people who enjoy looking at large single numbers. I do not recommend the red build to people who may not like frontal positioning because unlike blue, red does not have a stable DPS based on the player's experience. Red is also not tanky as blue, but tanky enough to rarely use potions and hard to die. Gunlancer is still one of the most loved class for new raid procs. Lastly, remember, make sure to try all the information above in Trixian, then invest your gold into the builds. Thank you friends, bye bye!